Welcome to another episode of Altitude Advantage with your team reporter and host, Elisa Hernandez, alongside our lead writer, Aric DiLalla. Happy Dub Day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Thank you. We are finally back in the Broncos studio after being on the road in Tampa Bay, West Virginia, and finally New York. But it was a very happy flight home with the Broncos defeating the Jets. And it's a win that head coach Sean Payton said was gritty. So, I always like to start after 24 hours. You've digested. It was a really crazy win to get back to 500. What are your thoughts on the game from yesterday?
Yeah, it obviously wasn't pretty, right? Which I think is fine. They're not all going to be pretty, but the Broncos won. And I think if you are a New York Jets fan waking up this morning, if you are a New York Jets player or coach waking up this morning, you're feeling a whole lot worse than the Denver Broncos because it was not a pretty game, but the Broncos came away with a win. And that's what matters, right? At the end of the day, I think Courtland Sutton said it post-game, and I thought about using this in a story before I heard Courtland's quote, and then when he said it, I appreciated it even more. He said it's like golf, right? And there's a saying in golf, there are no pictures on the scorecard. You can get a par, it might be ugly, you might be hitting in the water and then chipping in on a par 3, but you got the par, and there's no pictures there. Doesn't show how you got there. I think that's the same thing with this win. There are no pictures in a game book. 10-9 is the only thing that matters. The W is the only thing that matters. Listen, they're not all going to be pretty, Elisa, and Bo Nix said that. He said he was standing on the sideline, the offense was talking, and they said it may not be picture perfect, but we got to find a way to get it done. I think in the past, and I said this last night when I was recording our instant reaction edition of Altitude Advantage. I'm not sure the Broncos win a game like this in the past, specifically pre-Sean Payton. I think you saw them win some games like this last year, but this is the type of win that you look back on at the end of the season and say, man, I'm glad we got that one, because the difference between 1-3 and 2-2 is quite big. And the fact that you get back to 500, you find a way to scrap out a win. Listen, I've said it twice already. Every win in the NFL is not going to be like the one in Tampa Bay where it's just smooth sailing. You jump out to a huge lead and you kind of, I don't want to say coast to the finish, but it's never in doubt.
Yeah.
They are going to be battles week in and week out. And the fact that the Broncos got this one is a big deal. And, an ugly W is better than a prettier defeat. And this is big.
Well, it was definitely a very wild ending.
Yeah.
And I have to ask, because I had to go down to the field early. I talked to a couple guys after the game. Garrett Bowles, when he was asked, what was going through your head as Zerline kicks the field goal? And he's like, a miss. I wanted a miss. Pat Surtain II was just saying that, football is a game of inches. And both of them acknowledged that it could have easily gone the other way. They easily could have made it and given the Broncos that loss. But I have to ask you, what was your emotions going through as that final kick was going for the Jets?
Yeah, I thought there was actually a decent chance that he was going to miss it just because the weather was gross. I don't even think on TV it was evident just kind of how persistent the rain was, how nasty it was out there. Will Lutz obviously has had a great start to the season. The fact that he missed his, there was an earlier kick that Zerline made that kind of was veering to the left a little bit.
Yeah.
And so when Riley Moss gets called for pass interference, I am thinking this doesn't look great. But at the same time, this was not a 35-yarder. It was a 50-yard field goal that it feels like those are chip shots now, but given the elements, I thought that this was about a 50-50 kick. It either goes in or it doesn't. And luckily for the Broncos, it did not go in. And what a different conversation we'd be having, because for all the good things the Broncos did defensively, I think if that kick goes in, you're feeling like, and granted, let's be clear here, the Broncos still had a timeout. They still would have had about 45 seconds to try to get into field goal range. So it wasn't necessarily over, right? But would have been facing an uphill climb. And I think had you lost that game, you would have looked the same way that I think you can look back at it now and say, man, that's one that we took advantage of and we grinded out. I think you would have felt like it was an opportunity that slipped away. So Broncos probably very glad, I know they are, that kick sailed wide right and you find a way to get a win and get to 2-2.
And I think you look back at week 1 and week 2, and those are the kind of games that you're like, wow, the Broncos had a chance. They could have won. They should have won. And this could have easily been that kind of game. Now, you touched on the weather a little bit. It did impact the game. New York Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers acknowledged the difficulty of the elements. Jaleel McLaughlin had mentioned that, when talking to Bo Nix, they were talking about having the grip on the ball and trying to make sure and battling back through those elements. One unit on the Broncos that I felt thrived in the rain was the defense. Their performance was just outstanding since the initial play of the game. And I think it's interesting to say that they sacked Aaron Rodgers 5 times in Sunday's win. Going into week 4, Rodgers had been sacked 5 times all season. I know the season is young, but he wasn't getting got like that yet.
No, and it was the first time he'd been sacked 5 times in a game since 2020. That was a stat that we mentioned yesterday. Mm-hmm. It was, I think, only the 5th time ever that he's been held without a touchdown, like his team held without a touchdown. It was the first time since, I believe, early in 2020, I believe, or 2021, excuse me, when Sean Payton was the coach of the New Orleans Saints. They beat him 30-3. So this was not just a good defensive performance. This was an elite, dominant defensive performance, especially against a guy like Rodgers. Bo Nix caught a lot of heat, I think, online from the Twitter village again for his performance in the first half. And granted, he would tell you it was difficult to get a grip on the ball. Yeah. Sean Payton said
for both quarterbacks. Yeah. Let's be very clear.
Right. And Sean Payton said, listen, the weather definitely played a role. If you look at Aaron Rodgers' passing EPA, his expected points for the passing game, it was not much different than Bo Nix's. He had some throws that he said after the game he did not throw well. He did not play particularly well, is what he said after the game. So this impacted both quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. Let's be clear there. But you're right. The defense played really well. They got after him. I thought it was impressive how they confused him. Yeah. Sean Payton said Monday, hey, it's really difficult to do that, but there were a couple times it felt like where Vance Joseph's defense got the upper hand, where they sent some pressures at P.J. Locke, for example, where it didn't feel like he was expecting that one. Mm-hmm. And the Broncos are able to get it wasn't just the sacks. There were a lot of pressures, too. There were some forced throwaways. Certainly toward the end of the first half when the Jets are trying to score a touchdown there, JFM, who played a really good game, forces him out, forces a field goal. I mean, this defense again and again at all 3 levels, whether it was the linebackers, the defensive line, the secondary, they played really well. And listen, this is a team that a week ago people were talking about as, hey, they found their stride, they found their groove. This is a top 10 team in the NFL. Broncos went out there and kind of handled them at the line of scrimmage. I think that's what stands out to me most is Sean Payton said Monday, whether it was in the run game on offense or on defense at the defensive line, we won the line of scrimmage. If you win the line of scrimmage, you're going to win a lot of football games.
Yeah, and Sean Payton also mentioned he was very pleased that they were able to win the little battles as well.
Yep.
And Jonathan Cooper really spoke about, it's a lot of fun to get after the quarterback and get sacks and all those things, but their biggest thing was stopping the run. And he said that they really put an emphasis and even a premium on stopping the run, and they were able to do that against a really good backfield for the Jets. Breece Hall was very limited in the game, and the entire Jets rushing was under 100 yards.
Yeah, I believe 64, if I'm remembering that correctly. Braylon Edwards didn't do much either. They kind of brought him in as another option. Like you said, Breece Hall last couple of years had the Broncos number, and they played really well against the run. That's now 2 weeks in a row that the run defense has been pretty good. Listen, this defense is it's kind of dictating the terms of how other teams play, just with its tackling, the downhill speed, the aggressive approach. I think I saw a stat now that they're up to 2nd in total defense, 3rd in points allowed going into Monday Night Football. So this is a defense that is playing as well as anybody in the entire league. People are starting to take notice. I saw Mina Kimes tweet after the game or during the game, like, this Broncos defense is legit. Mm-hmm. And then I was listening to another podcast, Heed the Call, some great guys on there doing a good show. And they were saying, hey, this defense is going to keep the Broncos in games all year long. Yeah. So this felt like one of those games, again, where the offense did just enough. And, can the passing game be better? Sure. Do we want to see the run game on offense continue to develop? Absolutely. But to have those problems after a win is a heck of a lot better than having them after a loss.
That's true. And we're definitely going to get into Bo Nix and the running game a little later in this episode. But I have to kind of dive into the loss of Alex Singleton, and you have Justin Sternad step in. First play of the game, he gets a huge sack on Aaron Rodgers, really set the tone. I spoke to him after the game, and he actually joked that he has family members that are Packers fans, and he's like, if I have something to joke about at the dinner table about this, and he said that when he saw the clear lane, that he was literally thinking to himself, he said, it was like I was in slow motion, like I'm really about to sack Aaron Rodgers. And I bring this up because you lose someone like Alex Singleton for the season. And going into this week, everybody, when we were at the Greenbrier, was talking about next man up, stepping up. You can't replace a guy like Alex Singleton, but you can rise up around him. To come out and have a defensive performance like this against a future Hall of Fame quarterback, what does that say about this team?
Yeah, it was impressive. I thought the communication specifically was really good. That's what I said going into this weekend was I wonder if the Broncos defense is going to be able to get on the same page there and not have those communication breakdowns. That was really impressive to me. Cody Barton, Justin Strnad, like you mentioned, both played really well. Sean Payton was impressed with their play. Hopefully they can keep it up, but that's a really good way to start against a good offense.
And you look at some of the numbers. The Jets were 4 for 17 on third down. The first down came, the very first down of the game came pretty late in the first half. It was after a penalty call. We talked about how they shut down Breece Hall, but you have to look at the entire defense in its totality. And after the game, Pat Surtain talked about how when the defensive line is doing their job, it makes his job a whole lot easier. What did you see the way he was able to line up against some of the top receivers in this game?
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted it yesterday. He's erasing dudes out there right now, and it's impressive. He's doing it week in and week out. I think Garrett Wilson had 2 catches for like 23 yards. One of those catches should not have even been a catch. His knee was out of bounds. Sean Payton mentioned it after the game that he was standing right there, saw the knee hit out of bounds. We were upstairs in the press box. You could see on TV his knee was out of bounds. I'm not sure why that one didn't get overturned, but Pat Surtain put the clamps on. I think that when you have a pass rush, and you mentioned the pass rush makes it easier on him, but when he's holding up in coverage, it gives the pass rush an extra second. I think back, for example, that first sack you mentioned with Justin Strnad, there's nowhere to go with the ball. And so that's why Rodgers gets hit by Justin Strnad, is because he has an extra second to get there, because Surtain, Jaquan McMillan, Riley Moss are all in tight coverage, and there's nowhere to go with the football. And so it works both ways. They don't have to cover quite as long because of the pass rush, but the pass rush has an extra second to get there because the coverage is so good. You saw McMillan make a handful of plays. There was one on, I think, the second drive. He's breaking up a pass. I mean, he's as good a slot corner as I think there is. Riley Moss got whistled for a couple pass interference calls. I thought the one in the end zone was a tough call. Could have gone either way. But then the one at the end of the game, he responds right away, has a pass breakup on third down that sets up a 50-yarder instead of a 45-yarder, and maybe that goes in.
Huge difference.
Exactly. So, all 3 levels, again, of the defense are playing really well. They're working well together. We talk about complementary football between offense and defense, but there's also complementary football between the various levels of the defense, right? And right now, they're clicking.
Yeah. No, going into those numbers, Pat Surtain, from weeks 1 through 4, the ability to just take away big targets. Going into week 4, he had allowed 6 receptions for 63 receiving yards as the nearest defender in coverage in 2024. And according to Next Gen Stats, at one point in the game when Garrett Wilson was lined up against him, Garrett had 0 targets on 18 routes.
Yeah. I don't think Garrett Wilson had a target at halftime. He just took away an option. And if you can do that every week, and listen, we'll see if Davante Adams plays this week for the Raiders, but when you can take away the top option every week, obviously it limits a team. And if you're a team that doesn't have a big name second option, the way that like Seattle has a big name second option, Tampa Bay, I think, has a big name second option. When you don't have the big name second option, if Surtain can clamp the other guy, you're in a good spot.
Yeah, I took a deep dive into these numbers. I was very interested to see the way that Pat has been able to really just shut down these number 1 receivers, especially, we've talked about it, some that led their team in receiving yards last season, 1,000-yard receiving seasons, and we're definitely going to be looking into that matchup if Davante Adams plays, because those matchups with Pat Surtain have been very entertaining to watch year after year. We'll definitely get into that more in detail in the next podcast. But I pulled up this stat again from the NFL Next Gen Stats, and it says Garrett Wilson lined up against Pat Surtain on 28 of his 46 routes. That's 60% of the time. And he only had 2 of his 3 targets for 22 yards, which you had mentioned. And with Surtain in coverage, 5 targets, 3 receptions for 19 yards against all other defenders. So when you look at, like you were saying, you were giving Riley Moss his flowers as well, because all in all, Riley Moss has been really holding his own as Pat Surtain, as he has those receivers on his own little island over there.
Yeah, and I think you look at how the Broncos approached this game versus the Jets. The conditions were terrible. The Broncos, I think, realized that, started running the football, especially in the second half. They were able to get their run game going. The Jets, meanwhile, continue to throw the football. Rodgers threw it more than 40 times. And so if you're watching this game back, and part of it has to do, again, the Broncos won at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
But they kind of they went the way that the game needed to go because of the conditions, and I think that's why they won the football game. The run game really got going in the second half for the Broncos. Obviously it was tough in the first half offensively. Bo Nix had -7 passing yards. I know everyone's kind of fixated on that number.
Yeah.
But he came out and played better in the second half. The run game got going, and the offense did enough.
Yeah, 46 total yards for the Broncos in the first half, but the defense were able to keep the Jets, at bay. And let's touch on that, like the turning point of this game, right? And I did see a lot of talk on Twitter about Bo's performance and things like that. But one of the things that I take away from that is he didn't turn over the ball.
Yep.
He didn't fumble. No interceptions. There were no big plays where he took like a sack and lost a lot of yards. No sacks on the game. And I think like you said, just doing enough. You have to acknowledge those numbers. That sometimes he was asked during postgame, like, how is it like when you don't want to do too much and handling that patience of not trying to overdo it when you don't need to right now?
Yeah, I think he realized at some point they were going to have to make plays in the passing game. He did that in the second half.
Yep.
One of the key moments was that goal line stand by the defense in the first half. But offensively, the key moment is a 3rd and 11. The Broncos are backed up around their 20-yard line, and Bo Nix makes a throw of the game. Not just by him, but him or Rodgers. That was the throw of the football game to Courtland Sutton. Fits it in between 3 different guys, a dagger route that Sean Payton said Monday they'd probably thrown 40 times since the start of rookie minicamp. And now you're in Jets territory. You're kind of clicking. And there was maybe a suggestion that could come because on the first drop back in the second half, he connected with Sutton for, I think, a 23-yard gain, and Broncos ended up getting a penalty, a negative play. They weren't able to score points on that drive, but that was a sign that, like, hey, the rain let up a little bit. Maybe Bo Nix can get his feet going a little bit, get his game going. He makes that throw to Courtland. L.J. Humphrey picks up a pass interference penalty, and then 3rd down and 7 from the 8. He finds Courtland Sutton for his first career touchdown pass. Nice play from Courtland there to get his feet inbounds. Listen, I know it wasn't pretty, and we started at the very top of the show talking about this, that it's not going to be picture perfect, but I'd rather have a guy that can find a way to win when it's not pretty than a guy that is going to go in the tank and just play poorly or not find success the whole game, right? The fact that Bo Nix was able to go in at halftime, find a way to make adjustments, make a couple of big plays. Even on the Broncos weren't able to kind of salt the game away with that final first down, but Bo Nix still made a nice completion there to drain the Jets of another timeout there toward the end. On that long drive where the Broncos rushing attack really took over. He made a couple of plays. I mean, listen, it still wasn't perfect because of the weather, but he took a big step in the second half. And again, there's something to be said for when it's not pretty, when it's not perfect, you find a way to win, and Bo Nix did that. Jaleel McLaughlin said it. He knows how to win football games.
Yeah, he called him a good leader. 87 yards on 11 plays, 5:27 off the clock, 8-yard touchdown pass to Sutton. His first passing touchdown of his career comes in week 4. And my favorite part of that touchdown was you have this team struggling offensively. Everyone can see it's not a secret. When Nix hits Sutton for that touchdown, you would think they were up 20 points. Sutton was so excited, waved them over, called them over to let him have his moment. And it's like, look, block out the noise of what this game is. We just got the lead. Soak in this moment. This is your first passing touchdown. I think that says a lot about the bonding and the camaraderie of this team and the way that they're really backing their quarterback. They're really backing their rookie quarterback. They've called him a great leader. And Sean Payton saying he never lost confidence in him. And he's like, eventually you guys are going to stop asking me about confidence in my quarterback.
Right. Yeah. He said, we should send you guys to dinner with Bo. You'll tell he has all the confidence in the world. I think part of the reason they're so excited is that you play as poorly as you did in the first half, you're still winning after one touchdown, right? And that's what a great defense does for you right there, is that you're able to find a way to take the lead. I thought even more impressive was I keep saying the Packers because of Rodgers. The Jets go right back down and get a field goal to go back ahead.
Yeah.
It would have been easy for the Broncos to just kind of wilt there. And the fact that they took over the game, I know they didn't score a touchdown on that drive, but physically imposed their will on the next drive. It was gains of 5 yards, 9 yards, 10-plus yards.
Yeah.
Javonte Williams had his longest run of the season on that drive.
Yep.
And you work your way down into field goal range. You get another field goal to take the 10-9 lead, and then you let your defense do the rest from there. I would say that, the Broncos probably on that drive wanted to make sure that they don't make any mistakes, that Bo Nix doesn't throw a pick there. Like they leaned on their running game because it was working. They ran it on third down. I had no problem with it, the way they were running the football. And they ended up getting the go-ahead and ultimately game-winning field goal. That drive to me was just as impressive as the previous one because of you score, you go ahead, boom, they retake the lead right back, and then you show an ability to respond. We're learning a lot about this team's grit and ability to fight back from tough situations.
And offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi had talked about that run game, right? And he said, look, not every run is going to be a 20-yard burst, but the big runs are coming, and you just have to stick with it. You have to trust the guys that you have, and I feel like they really did that in the game versus the Jets. As you mentioned, McLaughlin and Williams really had some key runs, especially on those third down situations when they needed to extend their drive.
Yeah, the run game really got going, and the offensive line played well. They found some things that they liked from a blocking scheme standpoint. Sean Payton said Quinn Minor's got a game ball after the game for the way he played. That tells you what type of game it was when your offensive lineman's getting a game ball, right? That means it's a tough, physical, like grinded out sort of game. And the Broncos did that. They were able to, again, it wasn't always, and I've said this like 10 times now, because I feel like it wasn't pretty, was the way that the game unfolded.
Yeah.
But they made enough plays, and I've watched a lot of Broncos games over the last 9 seasons, and I think there's a lot of times in the past several years that the Broncos end up on the wrong side of this one, and they were the tougher team on Sunday, and that's why they won the football game.
When you look at the week that the Broncos had in West Virginia, a blessing in disguise. The elements that were in West Virginia, it was very rainy. They had to adjust. They practiced on grass. They had to practice on turf. And MetLife is turf. So that was almost a blessing in disguise there. But playing in those elements, I felt really kind of gave them a slight advantage to say, okay, we've been in this all week, and we kind of know how we can adjust.
I mean, they came out ready to go. I think they were willing to adapt. I mean, Sean Payton said on Friday after the Broncos practiced in a tennis center that he liked that because it forced you to quickly reset and get ready for a new challenge. It wasn't supposed to rain as much or as long as it did, right? Certainly we know looking at picking out our outfits for the day, it wasn't supposed to rain that much.
This is true.
But they were able to adapt, and I think part of that was, hey, you spend the week in West Virginia, one day you're on grass, the next day you go to turf, the next day you're not sure, are we going to practice inside, are we going to practice outside? Boom, you go to you're busting over to the tennis center and you're doing a walkthrough on tennis courts, and you kind of adapt this mentality of no matter what, we're going to find a way.
Yeah.
And everything's set up here for the Jets to win this football game. It was at home. They didn't have to travel. They played last Thursday. They had 10 days to get ready for this game.
Yeah.
They're coming off a big win. You've got a veteran in Aaron Rodgers that seemed to be finding his stride. And this was, as Sean Payton said Friday, we've got to play our very best game. These guys are good. And again, the Broncos came ready to go, ready to adapt to the challenge, ready to fight, no matter kind of what was thrown their way. Was it a tough pass interference call against Riley Moss that gives the Jets the ball down there at your 32-yard line? I think it was. Hey, we're going to find a way to make a play and get another PBU and just make sure this field goal remains as difficult as possible. Do they not call PI on a deep pass to Troy Franklin there in the third quarter? That's fine. We'll throw it to Cortland Sutton for 29 yards on the next play. I mean, that resilient mindset, I think, was really on display and led to a win.
One of the things I did see on Twitter that I am going to mention, because I feel like it's needed to be mentioned, is giving Vance Joseph his flowers.
Yep.
The game that he called, the players all across were just saying how lucky, not lucky, but they basically were just saying, like, this is what Vance Joseph does, and this is what we know. He's been able to do this all the time, and this is why we've been able to be so successful. And I felt like we just have to give Vance Joseph his flowers for the defensive performance he was able to put out, regardless of injuries, regardless of weather conditions. I feel like he called a pretty good game.
Absolutely. I mean, he kept Rodgers on his toes. He's a hard guy to confuse, to get after. As Sean Payton said, you might go another 20-plus games before Rodgers is sacked this many times. And it's probably closer to 50, 60, 70 games based on the last time that this happened to Aaron Rodgers, 5 sacks in a game. So, Vance Joseph called a terrific game. He stayed aggressive all the way to the end, even on that final drive. I think a lot of teams are tempted to sit back and just try to play coverage, and quite frankly, they lose because they're not being aggressive. Vance Joseph kept his defense coming. Obviously took a little bit of help there from Greg Zuerlein, but this defense played its heart out. And if they keep playing like that, the Broncos are going to be in a lot of football games. I'm excited to see where it leads, especially if in better weather, the offense kind of looks closer to what it did in Tampa versus the first half of this game.
One thing you said on the podcast when we were previewing this matchup was, do not let Aaron Rodgers get free plays. Yep. And if anything, we saw more penalties on the offensive side when they were on the field, and the Broncos were able to stay very disciplined going against him.
Yeah, there's only one time where that really happened, where I think Cooper jumped and Wilson, that was kind of the one catch where I thought his knee was out of bounds. But it was 23 yards. They ended up getting a field goal on that drive, but it wasn't the end of the world. There wasn't the touchdown deep shot. I mean, the Broncos had a play that was longer than any play the Jets had. So that speaks to, despite the struggles the Broncos offense had in the first half, they still were able to push the ball down the field more than the Jets were. Just on Twitter, if you're gonna throw some criticism Bo Nix's way, I want to hear it for Aaron Rodgers too, because that's a Hall of Fame quarterback, and both guys struggled in those elements. That should show you how tough it was. I think it's more a referendum on the conditions and the day more than the player.
And I know on TV it probably didn't even look like it was raining. It was very light rain, but it was consistent the entire game.
Footballs were soaked. I mean, guys were soaked. It was
some of the videographers that I saw out there, they were like, "Oh, we're fine." And then by like halftime, you see them in ponchos and coats because the rain just was so consistent that it really did start making it really hard out there.
Yeah, and it didn't matter. The Broncos found a way, and I like that toughness. I think when Sean Payton got here, he kind of talked about instilling that sort of mindset, and you're starting to, I don't want to say you're starting to see it, but certainly you saw it on Sunday.
I think that's fair to say, because week 1, week 2, they kept talking about momentum swings. They kept talking about when something doesn't go their way, grabbing that momentum right back. And I feel like that game on Sunday was a very good example of them grabbing that momentum back and not letting it swing too much in the Jets' way. So they return home now after being on the road 3 out of the 4 weeks. They have a few home games here in October. They have 3 of their 4 games as home games. First coming up with the Raiders and the Chargers. Big weekend coming up. After you have such a long month being on the road, especially for a rookie quarterback, how beneficial is it for them to be home?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that you won 2 out of your 3 road games, first of all, is a big deal, right? You get through that stretch. That was a tough stretch to open with, tough string of defenses to face. I don't want to say it eases up, because it never does in the NFL, but being home is certainly going to help. Listen, you've got an opportunity here, right? And at 0-2 a couple of weeks ago, maybe it didn't seem like you would, but now at 2-2 with 2 consecutive home games against division rivals, you get a chance to beat the Raiders for the first time in a long time, and too long, frankly. You got a chance. They're a little beat up. The Chargers are a little beat up. Obviously, you still got to go win the football games, and we'll see kind of where the Broncos are from an injury perspective. But you got to use this crowd over the next couple of weeks. You got to find a way to ride this defense, get what you need out of the offense, and this win, I just can't say enough about how important it is in terms of the season. Like, you're right in it now, and these next 2 weeks, you've got a chance to start to really build something. And
one thing, I have to shout out Broncos country for the way they traveled on the road in Tampa Bay and in New York in the rain or the heat. They stayed strong out there, and I think having that excitement and now coming back home to your home field, I feel like that's going to be an added boost for this team of knowing you're coming back to fans that know that you went out there and you handled business on this trip.
Yeah, we're in the throwbacks for the first time. It's alumni weekend. A couple guys going in the Ring of Fame, honoring Randy Gradishar for the Hall of Fame. It's against the Raiders. I mean, there's no. It's Raiders week, right? And we'll talk more about that. But it's going to be nice to be home, and hopefully, and I'm sure it will be. Empower Field, on my eye, should be rocking on Sunday, and hopefully the Broncos get another win.
Well, we'll talk about that and more on Thursday's episode, but I have to ask you one question before we get out of here.
Hit me.
It's been bugging me. I need to know, how much do you miss the porch and the lawnmowers?
I miss the porch a lot.
And the lawnmowers?
I think I found myself on that porch. I spent a lot of time on that porch. But no, it was a... You know, Sean Payton said, listen, this wasn't an excursion. He kind of gave the media a hard time. I do think it was beneficial. He said Monday, listen, it might have been one of 30 reasons why they won, but they went 2-0. And so I think there's no debate that it worked. You know, it was a good trip, I think, just in terms of the results matter, and it got results. So, but excited to be back and excited for a Thursday show. Leave your comments, leave your questions on YouTube. We'll get to them. And, excited to keep rolling. There's nothing better than being on a winning streak, because two's a winning streak, and trying to keep it going.
Well, we appreciate you guys listening and watching on YouTube. Again, make sure you guys leave comments, questions, anything you want us to talk about on the show. We're all ears. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Altitude Advantage with our lead writer, Aric DiLalla. I'm your team reporter and host, Elisa Hernandez. And until then, enjoy Dub Day, Broncos Country.